more background in terms of femininity in leadership, because some people still ask themselves, okay, please provide a bit more context. And if we want this to be an engaging conversation, so if you want to raise your hand, feel free. If you want to put some information in the chat, we want to have that engagement today. But just to give you a bit more glimpse about feminine leadership. Feminine leadership is a style of management adopted by leaders of all genders. Okay, so according to the Harvard Business Review, traditionally it's used as a kind of shorthand for an approach that places an emphasis on empathy, humility, and relationship dynamics in business practices. We want to explore today this area, and we want to highlight why this is needed in leadership. And I know some of you might be, asking yourself, am I a leader? Well, I am a firm believer that everybody has some forms of leadership in them. How it would look like may be different, but there's definitely things in which we can do to influence others, to help and to serve other people towards a greater purpose, a mission, or a cause. Okay. So feminine leadership belongs to all of us. And I know that some men have joined the call as well. And we're very happy to have a lot of engagement, since everyone is welcome today. And like we said earlier, feminine leadership is a style of management that can be adopted by all genders. Okay, so it's not just limited. But obviously the most amazing thing about today is it is International Women's Day, which means that obviously there's going to be a core focus on women. So how are we going to do this today? So I am going to ask questions to our keynote speaker, Alina Timofeeva. Now, one thing I really love about Alina Timofeeva is that she has a very interesting background and a beautiful journey, in which I hope that she will share with you shortly. Yeah. But Alina Timofeeva is a senior manager at KPMG UK. She supports some of the top clients in the financial services, whether that be the space, cloud, innovation, and advanced analytics. So a big up and shout. Pardon?
Technology.
And technology, exactly. So a big shout out to those who are working in tech at the moment. Last month, she was recognized for 2 awards in the UK technology as one of the future women leaders in the industry. So there's so much about her, especially as her background being the fact that she has studied at Harvard, and she's gone on to create so much for women within her sector and also personally. So I am so honored to have Alina join me today and want to really share a lot of her expert knowledge on leadership, on women's career progression, and also just share a lot of her own personal wisdom with each and every one of you. Now, you will have an opportunity to ask as much questions for Alina at the end, but I highly encourage you to put it in the chat for the time being. And myself and my assistant Dora, my lovely assistant Dora, will pick up and present across to Alina. Now, Alina, without further ado, and if we can just unmute ourselves and just give her a big round of applause as she will just introduce herself, and then we'll go into questions and we will discuss the topic in more depth. So would everybody just kindly unmute themselves and just clap for Alina as she joins now. So thank you.
Thank you, Safara. I do appreciate the inclusiveness, to be honest. I mean, thank you very much for inviting me here and, for organizing this session.
Oh.
Sorry, I think I got muted. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah, I was just saying it means a lot to me that you have, invited me here. I do want to start a little bit with my journey. So I'm originally from Russia, and interestingly, the Women's Day is a national holiday in Russia. And essentially all the different people, like the guys, the fathers, the husbands, they would give flowers to the women. But one of the things which perhaps we didn't necessarily look in Russia at from the women's perspective is the equality. So when I was growing up, I was brought up to be a housewife. I wasn't necessarily brought up to be a woman in business or woman in tech or woman in a corporate. So I haven't necessarily seen the role models in any sectors, to be honest. And there was a general idea that perhaps if you want to have a career, you can only do it through your friends or your relatives or your family, but you can't actually go and start, from a junior position growing up and up. I think I came to UK 6 years ago, and I started in Accenture as a graduate, I guess, a junior person, and I managed to grow to a senior manager within 6 years, which is 2 or 3 times quicker than perhaps some of my peers. And I think that one of the biggest kind of challenge to me, but at the same time the opportunity, was adapting my mindset. How do I move from seeing all the women in my family being housewives to perhaps being a leader or leading the team in a corporate? And I think what is quite important to me, there are quite a lot of good things, my family taught me around the inclusiveness and the collaboration, which is something which I take to my teams as well. And I wanted to share today some examples of maybe my stories when perhaps I didn't see a lot of inclusiveness when I joined, and how I'm fighting for this at the moment. And not just me, I guess my colleagues as well.
Thank you so much, Alina. And that's a very touching background about yourself. And I think a lot of us may be able to relate to your own experience growing up. Now, I am going to ask you a series of questions that you obviously are aware of, and just to really start this discussion, which is very, very important, especially during the times that we're in today. And these 4 questions will obviously be rounded around femininity and leadership and your own perspectives. And then we will then open the floor to a Q&A where we ask obviously the lovely audience to also ask their questions to Alina, and that's when you'll be able to put on your video and obviously unmute yourself to answer any questions that you have. Luckily, we have already had some questions which we're very happy about that have been sent to us via email, and we're excited as also obviously to hear from each and every one of you. So Alina, my first question to you is, describe what femininity in leadership is to you.
Yeah, so I think, Sephora, you mentioned some of the key characteristics, such as empathy, for example. But for me, it's a lot about the inclusiveness and the collaboration. I think, and we'll go through this later on, but I think one of the challenges I've experienced is when I came to UK 6 years ago, I didn't really feel part of the group. So I was quite different, and I really stood out. Maybe not so much how, I spoke English or I talked or I walked, but it was the cultural fit. I just didn't fit in. And the challenge I've had is it has significantly impacted me, I guess, on my mental health level. And because everybody in my start group and perhaps around me were more British at the time, they didn't really see Russian people before, so I was a bit of a curiosity. But even from their perspective, I didn't perhaps feel the inclusiveness to the level I would have liked it to feel, which led to my, well, let's say, depression. So I am very keen on these two components, the inclusiveness and collaboration. I think collaboration is something people always talk about in leadership, whether it's feminine or not. But I think inclusiveness is something which is very important for me.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for answering that question. And my second question to you is, based on your career journey and personal experience, do you feel that femininity has contributed towards your leadership style and career progression? And let me know if you want me to repeat that question if I'm going too fast.
No, that's fine. I mean, definitely it did. I would just want to say that I've seen it on both sides. I've seen people helping me, and I've had mentors, maybe not too early in my journey, but later on. And interestingly, most of my mentors have been men rather than women, just because in my industry, in financial services and technology, there are not so many senior women. It is a bit of a gap. But I have been able to identify a number of senior colleagues, like men, who were inclusive. They did have empathy, and this really helped me, I guess, progress faster. I want to bring another example from my life. In the first couple of years, I mean, I was in Accenture and I was doing okay. Like, my job was okay. I would say I was more treated at a task level rather than from their career aspirations and career objectives. And I think the gap I've had is I really wanted to grow and to get promoted, but perhaps I was told that no, you are not yet, I guess. You don't look like a consultant, or you don't behave like British people, or something else is wrong with you. And the thing which really helped me progress was when I met one of my mentors, who's still my mentor, who actually said, just be yourself, and you have an individuality. And yes, you are, from Russia, and you have a different mindset. You need to adapt in terms of feedback, but you don't need to change yourself to be able to fit in. And that was very important for me. And I think I stopped, trying to fit in or trying to be more like British people or more like English people. And this really helped my progression on a personal and mind-like level, I guess.
Thank you. And it's quite important that you say that, because uniqueness and embracing our own kind of own qualities and individualities is very, very key to being able to stand out and also provide value, because nobody wants a complete photocopy of somebody else. And so I completely relate to that. And I would just like to add on to that as well from my own perspective. Sometimes I think many women, from that angle, may feel like in certain environments, if they are too empathetic or they appear to be uh, a bit too nice or too friendly or whatever it is, that they may appear slightly weaker. And it's really important. I think this is a discussion where we really want to highlight that at times these are the things that we are sometimes, or we feel we need to hide, are the things that actually make us stand out and enable us to build rapport with people, whether it's from a client's perspective, but also to build relationships with various stakeholders in a way that is obviously professional, of course, but they can be strengths that that we can actually tap into as opposed to hide. So thank you so much, Alina, for that. And I guess another question that I have for you is, in your opinion, does feminine leadership have to be gender specific? Because there's a lot of stereotype of what feminine leadership should be and and how it should look like. So in your opinion, does feminine leadership have to be gender specific? And also, does having this leadership style appear weaker amongst a predominantly male dominated environment or sector? And I guess that ties in very well with your own experience,
Yeah.
and your sector.
Yeah, so I do want to highlight again, there are not so many women in my sector. And I think the challenge I'm having is I am usually the only woman, or maybe there are two women on a call. And sometimes I find men like being too driven, too competitive, and it just in a way energizes the whole environment, but sometimes stresses the teams, in particular the junior teams, quite a lot. So I do believe that feminine leadership, the way we defined it today, it doesn't have to be gender specific. And I do think that on my journey, as I said, I benefited from men that actually listened to me, and it felt like they were empathetic to me. And I mean, for me, it was very important, at least at that point in time. I want to say one more thing, and I'm sure we'll come to it later on, but I don't always see companies, clarifying what is feminine leadership. So we have the different talks around leadership, right? Or maybe as you grow senior, it is how you are a leader. But the term, or perhaps the whole culture or the training around feminine leadership, I've never actually seen it, at least as part of, like my corporate structure. And I think that this is where perhaps the gap is, because maybe that's where the misunderstanding comes, whether it's gender specific or not gender specific, because people don't always know about it under this term.
No, that's completely right. And just thank you for all those who've recently joined. Again, continue to put your questions into chat as we are speaking. But again, based on kind of Harvard Business Reviews and different publications, feminine leadership doesn't necessarily, or is said that is a management. Obviously, it's a management style that can be seen as both genders when we're looking at the characteristics perspective. Obviously, through a lot of kind of history, it's always been more categorized with women and associated with women naturally. But when we look at the characteristic perspective, feminine leadership is increasingly popular, especially with millennials and the generational X, because it's all about people, it's all about emotions, it's all about also understanding and putting yourself in the shoes of the other person, which is great for sectors and sales. When you're obviously pitching towards client, because it's not enough now just to kind of sell a product, but
Yeah.
you have to put yourself in your client's shoes. You have to understand your client, use a bit of psychology. Why do they want this product? What value is it going to bring to this person? And that's where a lot of that can be categorized within feminine leadership, and people don't even realize it. So it's a very powerful tool. And with that being said, I'm going to move on to the next question. What ways can women influence or adopt a more feminine leadership or more feminine leadership in the workplace to solve problems and bring more value? And one of the reasons why we say women is because obviously today's International Women's Day. So because of the theme, we are saying women, but we're not saying that men can't also put these tools into practice. So yeah, fire away, Lena.
Yeah, so I guess from my side, I would definitely use it as part of mentoring. And in particular, it doesn't have to be top to down mentoring. It can be, across the levels. So it can be me mentoring my peers or my peers mentoring me. I think sometimes what I find, like in my profession, which is quite hard, you have clients and you always want to be your best in front of clients, right? And then you have your colleagues and you also want to be your best in front of colleagues in a way, right? But you end up being either too stressed or it's maybe just too difficult, right? And it's always good when somebody can see you as a human being and actually ask, how are you today? Are you, really okay? And I think what I'm finding, well, at the times of COVID in particular, right, I've had an accident and I wrote about it on my LinkedIn once, but I was assaulted twice on the street by like a random person. I mean, it didn't have anything to do with my work and it wasn't, necessarily during the exact time of an assignment, right? But it was nice when somebody like reaches out to you and kind of offers you some help, whether it's help through my company or whether it's just generally listening and giving some sort of support. And that was one of the examples which I can bring in the recent times when I was personally helped by some of my colleagues who were not necessarily senior in organization, but who were, my peers or even perhaps a little bit junior. I think another thing in terms of influencing, I do think that it would be beneficial in adding some more agenda in terms of maybe not necessarily training, but in terms of talks and awareness in organizations around feminine leadership. I know at the moment we talk for about around bias, for example, unconscious bias. So I see, sessions on that, but I don't tend to see a lot on feminine leadership. So I do think it could be beneficial and something driven by, I guess, the company per se. I think these are kind of the key things for me, which I personally experienced. But I'm, happy to hear from the audience if they have other examples.
Yeah, thanks, Alina. And you're definitely right. And I have as well some input to add on that questions on practical steps and practical ways. And obviously, this could vary depending on your sector. This could vary depending on your area of focus, because I know that there's people from all different kinds of background. And I was quite surprised when I had a conversation with somebody, and there seems to be sometimes, and that is not the attitude of every person, of course, but there's some people who kind of shy away from it or are a bit of ashamed because of what they feel like is associated with, and whether they will appear weaker or whatever, or whatever that mindset is all about, which is nothing wrong with that, but it's really understanding that with feminine leadership, again, with the focus on the characteristics, um, what you can use feminine leadership, and I believe why it's so relevant today is you can use feminine leadership again to provide value. Now, how do you provide value? You provide value because with the feminine leadership, there's a strong focus as well on people, on rapport, on building relationships. Now, that is critical for any industry. You can imagine we are currently in a pandemic. We are not able to see people face to face. I have met Alina, for instance,
On
virtually
LinkedIn.
on LinkedIn, virtually. I've met her in through, via technology. I've spoken to her via technology, but it's just that understanding is how are we, is the active listening, is the ability to really understand where they're coming from, is the ability to also find a solution as well. So once you're able to identify and build the rapport, is how do you provide a solution to that person based on what they've told you, based on the problems that they've had. Also, is sometimes people characterize and can and say that feminine leadership is also meant to kind of servant leadership, where you obviously want to be able to support the person, you want to put the needs of the person before you. So there's so much history towards feminine leadership that I don't think anybody should be ashamed of or deter themselves away from. But on the practical steps as well, it could be as well sharing and passing down knowledge. Also, if you know that you're somebody who has a lot, or he may work in a kind of male dominated environment, or an environment where they're not exposed to feminine leadership, is about teaching some of the characters and also linking it back to your organization's values. We need to be more like this, we need to adopt more of these principles, practices, if we're going to be able to create the most impact, if we're going to fulfill these targets. But one thing that is so important, and I think this is for leadership in general, is that value and problem solving are very interlinked. One of the greatest way you'll always be able to provide value is by providing a solution. It's not about just identifying a problem, but providing a solution and involving other people into it. Being collaborative. Understanding that some of the times there's going to be diversity in thoughts between the people that you work with or the people that you're associated with, but it's also about ensuring that they also have a voice to share their opinions. So there's, so a lot of people don't realize how powerful feminine leadership is. So the more you research it, the more you realize that, wow, it's actually very fascinating, and it could also propel and enable a company to really drive its goals much quickly. So we're seeing it rapidly, especially around CSR, corporate social responsibility, and all the different sectors kind of influence with these, core characteristics and aspects of feminine leadership that people just thought, oh, it's just to do with some people just think it's just to do with a bunch of women and that's it, but it's not. There's so much research on the characteristics of feminine leadership and what it can bring about. So thank you so much in regards to your contributions, and we will be going through a lot more questions. I do have a bit more before we can get the audience to speak. We did do a poll earlier on, but I do want to do a poll now. I just think it's kind of right for us to do another poll, and I want you, based on just the information that you've learned so far, what do you think about what we've just shared? So, Dora, would you kindly launch the poll, and we'll give you guys a minute to go through that and just to answer your questions and to give your perspective. But so far, please put a thumbs up if you're enjoying what you're hearing, if you're finding it beneficial or finding it useful. Please raise your hands or put in the chat. We want to know that we're obviously providing value to you. So thank you. Oh, thank you, Jessica. I love the love heart. Would love to hear from any of you if you're finding this beneficial. Thank you, Nina. Amazing. If you're finding this beneficial, we want to know that we are providing some value to you all. So thank you, Lisa. Amazing. Great. So we'll just have another 10
Just
seconds. Oh, does somebody unmute themselves? Okay. So in terms of just the poll, we'll just give you another 5 seconds. But again, if there's any nuggets that you're taking from here, we would love to, have some engagement in the chat. If there's particular things that kind of stand out to you, if there's examples of feminine leadership that you've seen in the workplace, please also highlight this. Okay, so we'll end the poll now. So far, it's been interesting results. It seems as if all of you believe femininity is needed in leadership. At least 62% of you feel like you have a more feminine approach to leadership. and also about 77% have agreed that it's not only women who can demonstrate femininity and leadership. So it's interesting to know where your thinking is coming from, and it's interesting to know that you don't think it's women. It's just it's something that is just associated with women. Also, it seems that quite over half of you do feel like you have a more feminine approach to leadership, and we'll love to hear some examples of why. And also, all of you believe it's needed, and that's such a key thing. All of you believe that it is needed, you know, in whether it's in your workplace, in your communities, or wherever else it may be. So that's perfect. Now we're going to just ask some of the questions that we received from some of the attendees. And one of the questions, and feel free to raise your hand if you do have a question for Alina or myself, and we will be more than happy to answer that. But one thing that someone did ask is and we had this from a participant called Anita, is what do you believe people mistake femininity to mean or look like? I guess we have touched upon it, but if you have
Yeah,
elaborate on.
I guess in a way it's sometimes thought to be a weakness, or at least the way we have described it today. I think I've never seen women question it, to be very honest. I've sometimes seen men perhaps question it. But I have been seeing like a lot of senior leadership, at least in our firm, taking more of the approach on the empathetic side. I think sometimes the personality of people doesn't always allow them to be naturally empathetic and inclusive, but I think people try to work on that generally. I think that there is quite a lot of inclusiveness in terms of all the different workshops, or at least in my company at the moment, there is a lot of focus on it. I think whether people actually put it into the practice, I think it depends. So there could still be work in there. I would personally say that I wouldn't see it as a weakness. I would say that probably you need to apply it depending on the circumstances. So you may be meeting a very senior client, right? And perhaps at that point in time, you need to go and present and to drive results. Whereas at the same time, you will be working with your team, either it's late at night or during the day, right? And you need to show the empathy and inclusiveness. So it depends on the situation. And I would say that you have to have it as a trait, and it's not a weakness per se.
Yeah, thank you so much, Alina. And I completely agree with you. Obviously, I believe that there's so much more to us than just feminine leadership, and there's so much more to your personality and everything. But I think, like you says, what do people mistake it as is sometimes people just mistake. I think people sometimes just think it's like feminists just coming forward, putting something in their face, and that's just the natural truth. And I think, especially as women, everybody has different views. I'm not going to go into what feminism is, but in terms of femininity as a characteristic, I think people really dissociate themselves from that, and I see it as strength. I consider myself to be an extremely feminine person, but also with other forms to myself, and I've seen its benefit in my own personal kind of career journey, showing that empathy, being able to relate to people, and other kind of key characteristics. And I think it's just people sometimes are just afraid. For them, it's afraid of kind of embracing that title because of fear. And as women, I'm speaking from a woman's perspective, because of what they might be stereotyped to be. And I think that this is something that it may feel very extremely natural for women to want to show empathy based on so many different things, but I don't think anyone should shy away from it at all.
And I just want to add, I guess, in terms of my day-to-day, for example, or whatever some of the consultants do, is they try to use it as part of day-to-day, because it does drive the performance not only of the team and of the firm, but it also makes you feel better ultimately as a person. So I do want to say that, I mean, it makes a difference.
Yeah, Thank you so much. And just actually, the one last point that I just remember, studies have shown that the majority of women will feel like it's natural to them. Now, I'm not saying it's everybody 100%, but the majority of demonstrating feminine leadership does feel natural to them. So we don't want anybody to feel like they can't be who they really feel like they are in the inside. Okay, so the next question is, what balance does femininity bring in male and masculine dominated spaces?
Yeah, so I think I touched a little bit upon
Yeah.
it, but I think I've been working with men for a long time. So just to give a perspective, when I was at school and when I was at university, the ratio of guys to girls was like 10-1.
Mhm.
And the interesting thing that my grandmother actually saw it as a good opportunity to get married rather than, to study maths and to become excelled in that. I would say that for me, I've always had to, work with men in different perspectives. And I think what is quite interesting, when you just have a male-dominated environment just with males, they are quite competitive and they are quite, I wouldn't say aggressive, but I'll say aggressive. Maybe it's not the right word exactly, but I think the lady does bring some balance, and it does bring the balance of empathetic lens as well, because I do have quite a lot of men at my work coming to me and asking, I would say, for empathy, or asking for advice, or asking for some sort of an opinion which perhaps they can't go to their boss or to their peer to ask for. And I've seen it working quite well, I guess, in terms of myself. I do want to say that sometimes I personally feel that there are just too many men and too few women, and then I don't really have anyone to lay my shoulder on in terms of empathy. So I have to console myself, and then console all the other people around me as well. So hopefully that's going to change, I guess, in terms of finance and technology and leadership. But I do think it does bring a balance, even in smaller things, which may not be just purely, driven by tasks or by work.
Amazing. And I think just to touch upon that, that is why, for those who also may have joined in, she did mention again, Alina does work heavily in the technology space and financial sector, which means that obviously, as she explained, the ratio is slightly different. And whereas some people can be working in areas where there is more women, etc. But one thing that Alina said, which I think is quite useful, is that sometimes like her ability to work with men and different types of people within the workplace and have them come to her for empathy, come to her for certain advice, just shows the importance of why women need to be in the space and in the room, because not we can't all think the same, we can't all act the same, we can't all do the same things. It's just there's something very powerful when we're able to all come into the workplace and provide our own perspectives, our own journeys, and our own expertise, and then solve problems. And that's something that, for all the women who obviously, because I know a big part of this event today is about women's career progression, is also making sure that you're able to identify that, like write notes, give examples of times where you provided value through advice, where you receive recognition. Don't be afraid to do that, because it's so important to go out and get feedback and say, okay, what do I do to improve, while still using the characteristics that that you're most comfortable with, regardless of what that is to you. So making sure that you are producing value is also require you to make a note of that, is to give really good examples within your workplace or your own business or whatever it is, to ensure that you're able to progress, because people want to hear and they want to actually understand what you've done. It's one thing being able to do it, but it's one thing able to kind of demonstrate how that's impacted others and how that can take you to the next level within your career as well. I hope that makes sense to everyone. Now, moving on to another question that we've received, which I think is really, really good, is how do you decide how much of your personal self to bring to work? I find that the version of myself I show my friends is super different to the person I am when I come to work. Do you think sharing more of who you are and your individuality is important to nurturing a feminine leadership style?
So I guess I'll share a couple of examples, and one will probably show different lenses of the answer. So when I used to come to work when I just came to UK 6 years ago, right? I used to bring everything to work because, to be honest, I was quite lonely because I just moved. I didn't know anybody. I didn't have any friends, and I was constantly moving from houses for a variety of reasons. So I was quite depressed in a way. So I would come to work, and there was a funny situation when my colleague came to me and said, "How was your weekend?" or "How was your first week?" And I was like, "I didn't get paid my salary, and I got kicked out of the house, and I live in a place without a shower and without water and without Wi-Fi, etc., etc." So every day I come to the gym and to have a shower to actually come to work clean. So after that, nobody actually spoke to me about my weekend or my week, I think, for about a year. So I learned that probably that's not the best approach in terms of stressing people out too much with my personal, I guess, individuality. But I think it took me, I would say, 6 months or maybe 1 year to actually adjust to the level where I don't perhaps overburden people with my problems. And I used to have quite a lot of them at the time. And at the same time, I don't necessarily change my individuality, right? To be like, I don't know, too sweet if I'm not too sweet, or maybe too whatever it is. So, for example, small talk is not something which I'm used to from birth because it's not typical in Russia. So I had to learn it to a level that is fairly natural to me, right? So I guess what I do at the moment, I do have a certain level of individuality which I bring to work, and I think it is classified as my strength, right? So, for example, I'm quite straightforward, right? I have a personal touch in terms of sharing stories, for example, and people tend to like it, right? I would advise, in answer to that question, to remain individual, but just to observe the people around you, how they can react to it. And perhaps you may need to adapt a little bit, but it will be more person on person. So what I found, there are some people who are really, really straightforward in my workplace, and they really come to me and say, "Oh, we really value the fact that you are so straightforward. Can you give us an honest feedback and advice?" Right? And there could have been situations when people felt I'm too straightforward and perhaps complained that I'm too straightforward. Right? So I'm adapting depending on the people, and inside of myself, I stay the same. Right? I found that when I first joined the company, I was trying to adapt perhaps a little bit too much, and this was stressing me out personally quite a lot. When I stopped adapting too much and accepting myself, this has actually accelerated my progression.
Mm. Thank you so much, Alina, because you touched upon something very important. You said adapt, and I know some people thinking, oh, adapt. My with the question that was given, it's a very good question, and it can lead to so many. I think it can open the floor to a massive amount of discussion. And my first thing is you need to study the environment that you're working at. And the reason why I say this is because I worked in so many different environments, and different environments come with different personalities. You know, I've worked briefly in the financial sector. I worked in a really small kind of business, a startup with more family feel. Then obviously I'm now kind of in a legal sector. So things will definitely vary. Now, some people would say, but you know, you've got to be yourself, and I do agree. I think that you have to be yourself in a sense that your personality, people need to be able to say, when I meet Sephora, even if she's professional, because a lot of people who may know me or see me in my professional element, or see me in my professional uh, kind of hat at the moment, they need to be able to say, okay, she's still professional, but I still see a glimpse of her personality. I still know that at the end of the day, she's still joyful. She still, you know, sometimes likes a bit of humor, and, you know, she likes to smile. There's certain aspects of yourselves that I don't think should hide of who you really are. You know, I always say to people as well, one of the things that I'm very passionate about is my faith, is my Christian faith. And even when I'm in a working environment, although do I over talk, do I talk about it to large extents the way I will talk about it in other environments? Probably not, but I definitely highlight it in some of my values, in the way that I conduct myself, in the way that I do things. So people do know and can associate me still with my core identity, regardless of the fact that I am being professional and the fact that I am getting the work done. So most of the times, which I don't want to, tell somebody what to do by all means. Sometimes we have to study the environment that we are working at and actually ask ourselves, in some occasions, whether they are right for our personality, our purpose, and where we see ourselves. In some occasions, we may have to really sit down and say, does this environment complement my core values and who I am? Do I feel like I am entirely a different person? Or is it a case where I just need to kind of just loosen up a little? I need to kind of start building rapport, study how people kind of respond to things, and just, have meaningful conversations with them. Because sometimes people are just waiting on a conversation, but they don't know whether they should take the first step, or they're waiting on you to do it. So it really depends on the environment that you're in. So it's sometimes quite hard to advise. But one thing I would say is, by all means, definitely study the environment, be your personality, be yourself, but also, again, have that professionalism so that people can still find you as credible, but also personable. You want to be remembered by being somebody that, has this core skill. They want to be able to say, Sephora is the one that, if she wants to cheer you up and give you encouragement, go to Sephora at work. Or if you want that expert advice, you want somebody to tell you, how it is or whatever, go to Alina. You still want to have something about you that people can relate to. I think that's very, very important. I hope I've answered your question um, for you. Now, I think we just have about a few more questions, but we do want to ask this again. Thumbs up if you are getting some key nuggets out of today. Feel free to put in the chat if there's any kind of things that you would want to kind of ask, because we want to hear from you. We want to hear your own perspective. We know that not everybody is in the workplace. I know that some people are based in religious institutions, faith-based groups, and we invite everybody here, because I think that this topic can relate to everyone. Now, another question which I think is quite useful is, how should a woman in leadership deal with unconscious bias in the workplace?
Yeah, so that's a very good question. I think from my personal experience, at least when I was more junior, I wasn't always seen as saying something important or relevant, even though I've been saying the same stuff or similar stuff to, say, my boss, who would have been perhaps more years of experience. And what I found, which was very important for me, is to be heard, or to ensure that other people, they don't just look at the fact that I'm fairly young or quite young, but they actually listen to my knowledge, in that example, in technology, innovation, etc., etc. That was a bit of a challenge for me, to be very honest. I think the way I deal with unconscious bias, I mean, sometimes, and I would say quite often, I do ask for feedback from other people. And one of the things which I ask them is, how do I come across? Right. And then we could try having a more honest discussion, that I am how I am. And I guess I'm happy to adapt to a level, but that's how I am. And I have my own strengths, which perhaps are very specific to, like, my knowledge, for example, and specific character traits, which are also very specific to me. So that was something which helped in a way. I do think that at organizational levels, they're trying to educate people about unconscious bias, for example. But maybe some of you may have read, like, a month ago, we had our chairman resign because he said unconscious bias doesn't exist. And there was a lot of negative press around it. So he ultimately resigned. And there is just much more focus on unconscious bias at the moment in our firm. I do think that there are different learnings and trainings, but I do want to ensure that people actually think through these, because sometimes people just click through trainings and don't actually think through this. And the way to make it work is when you go on a personal level, trying to speak to, well, your colleagues or your mentors or the people around you, trying to put across your idea. And you don't have to wait for them to come and tell you their feedback, because perhaps they'll never will, you can be quite proactive in terms of having this discussion or trying to understand, how do they perceive them and how you could change it. I do think that unconscious bias will probably exist for some period of time because it's a longer term curve. But I think for your personality, you can try to do this personal step at the moment so that it doesn't impact you, at least not that much.
Great, thank you so much, Alina. And I think with the unconscious bias as well, from even a woman's perspective, you will notice that being a black woman as well, the unconscious bias between not only gender but also race is also another thing, which hopefully we'll be able to explore in another session. But I think with dealing with unconscious bias, I think this is one of the most powerful times to impact D&I. This is one of the most powerful times to either sit on the sidelines and just wait, or be more vocal with with a lot of evidence, with with clear solutions as well to your D&I team. I'm a firm believer, as you can see, a lot of my philosophy and my mindset is to do with problem solving. I think problem solving shouldn't be just left as a consultant. I think all of us need to wear a consultant hat at times, depending on the sectors that we're at, and also be able to discuss some very kind of important discussions around unconscious bias in the workplace if it's necessary. Because right now people have the ears to listen. There's a lot going on at the moment, which provides a lot of room to create change, and the change might not look as impactful to you. The change might not look as if you change the whole process of your organization or your company or whatever it is, but change could just be the fact that they heard. And even if you had left or you were no longer working there or retired or whatever, things then took place. So it's like a legacy that is even beyond you, or is something that's going to change the culture, um, just by you saying something. So I think this is a really great time to make that impact, especially obviously as a woman.
I just wanted to give just one more example because I remembered it. I remember once there was a manager who wasn't not my personal manager, but a manager from the team who came to me. And he said, "Oh, you're a woman and you are blonde and you are a PMO, so you are pretty much stupid." I mean, he didn't say exactly stupid, but then he spent 7 hours standing to me and listening to my life story and all the different elements of the life story. And then he said, "Oh, I never thought that you could have so many stories." And I think it was just a good example of, how your personality could impact the way the other person sees you,
Yeah,
even if there is bias already.
exactly. And obviously, we only have 5 minutes left. And I think the last question that we've received, and we want to say again a big thank you to all of you who have been able to ask questions or even just listening and taking something from today, is how, which I guess it ties with another question, but it says, how can a woman in the workplace make their mark? And I think this question has been touched upon a little bit, but I would say one of my biggest examples and biggest inspiration, um, in terms of why it's so important to be yourself, and embrace and first understand who you are, and what value you have to bring, and be very kind of assertive on what you believe that you're going to solve, or to achieve, is obviously is the obviously the Director General of WTO, which you obviously all know what that is, and that's obviously Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala. I might not be saying her name properly, but I think I'm just so fascinated. The World Trade Organization. I'm so fascinated at the fact that I've always known her to be a woman who authentically would have her African wrapper on, her African attire, who was just herself, who was just herself. And I think it's so important for us to know who we are as individuals in terms of our belief systems, our values, and who we are. And I think that's how you make your mark, because there's no point of you trying to influence your organization and then the next minute you change to be a different person. People can't really picture what personality you have, or you change your mind very quickly, or you might agree to do something and then the next minute, well, you completely kind of go against your first line of thinking. It really depends, obviously, based on the context, but it's about having that strong identity and knowing, okay, this is some of the things I stand for, but I'm still obviously open to understanding more and being challenged and having all of these different things. But the best way to influence is understanding who you are, and understanding what you want to bring to the organization, to the world, or to your business or your clients. Alina?
Yeah, so I just wanted to say that I'm doing quite a lot of mentorship at the moment. And I think the purpose of that is just to guide, and it's not only women, it's men as well, just to guide through how you could go through different situations in your career. And that is something which I find is quite important. It's not just showing yourself and setting your mark, but also helping the others achieve, their ambitions as well and giving back. So that is, I guess, my insight on this.
Yeah, amazing. Coaching, all of these other things as well are practical ways as well you can make your mark. Well, I just want to say a very, very big thank you to first of you, Alina. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for sharing so much knowledge. It's been a pleasure knowing you in such a short space of time, hearing about your journey, your transparency. Just you being so transparent about things you've gone through is courageous. And I just want you to know that we are very, very grateful to have had you today. I also want to thank each and every one of you for attending, for coming on this call and listening for the past hour on why femininity is needed in leadership. And hopefully you were able to understand or take one thing in terms of why it is, and hopefully implement that in your own workplace, community, organization. And the last thing is we do have a recording. We do have a recording available. However, because of the spirit of this, it being International Women's Day, we want to donate. We want to donate something to a charity. So we want you to be able to make a donation to a charity called Like Minded Females. Which we will share via email. So I will send you an email across to each and every one of you a bit more about the charity, and just send any donation you want to them, and we'll give you a copy of the recording. We want to obviously stick to our word and give back to women and to people who need it as well. So thank you so much, everyone, and I hope you have a great rest of your International Women's Day. Thank you.
Thanks. Thanks, everyone.
Take care.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Bye, everyone.